What would you do if your own daughter sold your house while you were at the doctor's office? What if she hung up on you like you meant nothing after 45 years of sacrifice? And what if she had no idea that her poor, helpless mother was actually worth millions? This is the story of Antonia Brooks, a 71-year-old widow who discovered that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting someone destroy themselves while you watch from the shadows. I was sitting in that sterile doctor's waiting room, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and the quiet desperation of sick people, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my only daughter's name, Angela. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe she was calling to check on my appointment, to see how I was feeling. Maybe she actually cared, but the voice that came through the phone was cold, mechanical, like she was reading from a script. Mom, we're going on a trip to Europe tomorrow. I already sold your beach house and your car. We needed the money, buy, click, just like that. 45 years of raising her, sacrificing for her, loving her unconditionally, and she discarded me like yesterday's garbage with a 2-minute phone call. I sat there in that uncomfortable green plastic chair, staring at my phone screen, waiting for it to ring again, waiting for her to call back and say it was all a joke, a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional cough from other patients and the distant sound of medical equipment. Beeping down the hallway, my name is Antonia Brooks. I'm 71 years old, and until that moment, I thought I knew my daughter. I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I understood the meaning of family. I was wrong about all of it. 6 months earlier, my world had collapsed in the most ordinary way imaginable. Robert, my husband of 45 years, had been serving me breakfast just like every other morning for nearly half a century. Coffee with cream, toast with butter, and that gentle kiss on my forehead as he said, "Good morning, my love." Those were his last words. Before I could even respond, before I could tell him I loved him too, he collapsed from a massive heart attack right there in our kitchen, right there at the table where we had shared thousands of meals and made tens of thousands of memories. The funeral had been a blur of flowers and condolences and people who meant well but couldn't possibly understand the depth of my loss. Angela had been there, of course. She had helped with the arrangements, sat beside me during the service, held my hand when I couldn't stop crying. She had seemed so caring, so attentive. For the first time in years, I felt close to my daughter again. After Robert's death, Angela started visiting 3 times a week. She would bring groceries, help with household tasks, and suggest practical things like getting a general checkup with the doctor. "Mom, you need to take better care of yourself now that you're alone," she would say with what I thought was genuine concern. That smile I interpreted as love was actually something much more calculating. Convenience. The beach house had been our sanctuary for over 30 years. Robert and I had bought it when Angela was 15, scraping together every penny through years of careful saving and sacrifice. Robert worked double shifts driving the city bus, and I took on extra cleaning jobs just so we could afford that little cream-colored house with the porch overlooking the ocean. Every summer, we would pack up our old car and drive to the coast, building sandcastles with Angela, grilling fish on the barbecue, and creating the kind of memories that were supposed to last forever. As Angela grew up, she brought boyfriends to the beach house, then eventually her husband Edward. I would cook elaborate meals for everyone, do mountains of laundry, and clean up after their visits without complaint. It was our family tradition. I never imagined that to Angela, all those precious memories could be reduced to a simple dollar amount on the sales contract and Robert's truck. That old Ford pickup wasn't just transportation. It was a shrine to my husband's memory. He had washed it every single Sunday for 20 years, changed the oil religiously, and always parked it in the exact same spot under the oak tree in our driveway. When I sat in those worn seats, I could still smell his cologne mixed with the lingering scent of the peppermints he always kept in the glove compartment. That truck was the last tangible piece of Robert I had left, and Angela knew exactly what it meant to me. After she hung up, I remained in that waiting room chair for another hour. Not because I was waiting for my appointment, but because I simply couldn't move. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. For the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't crying. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A strange, cold clarity. That's when I remembered the envelope. 3 days before Robert died, he had handed me a manila envelope with my name written on it in his careful, precise handwriting. "Antonia, put this in the drawer of your dresser," he had said. "If something happens to me, open it after a while, but only when you feel ready. I had tucked it away without much thought, my mind occupied with other things. After the funeral, drowning in grief and overwhelmed by arrangements, I had completely forgotten about it. But now, sitting in that sterile waiting room after my daughter had just stolen my life out from under me, I remembered. And suddenly, I understood that Robert, my careful, methodical husband, had always been a man who planned for every possibility. The nurse eventually called my name, and I went through the motions of my medical appointment. The doctor declared me healthy for my age, told me to eat better and rest more, and sent me on my way. But my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about that envelope waiting in my dresser drawer, about the coldness in Angela's voice, and about how Edward had probably orchestrated this entire betrayal. He had never liked me, had always treated me like an obstacle to his plans. And now he had convinced my daughter to throw me away like garbage. I took the bus home because, according to Angela, I no longer owned a car. As I sat by the window watching the city blur past, I couldn't help but smile. There was something almost poetic about the situation. My daughter thought she had left me with nothing, completely powerless and dependent on her charity. What she didn't know was that Robert had always been several steps ahead of everyone else. The house felt different when I walked in. Emptier somehow, as if Angela's betrayal had physically removed something from the rooms Robert and I had shared for so many years. I went straight to the bedroom, opened the dresser drawer, and there it was, the manila envelope exactly where I had left it 6 months ago. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. I could feel multiple documents inside, and the weight of them seemed to promise answers to questions I didn't even know I should be asking. I sat on the edge of the bed where Robert and I had slept together for 4 decades, took a deep breath, and opened the envelope as carefully as if I were unwrapping a precious gift. What I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my life. The documents were all legal and official: property deeds, investment certificates, bank statements, and business papers. But it was Robert's handwritten letter that took my breath away and made me understand the true scope of what Angela had just done to herself. My dear Antonia, the letter began in his familiar script. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and I hope you can forgive me for keeping secrets. I never told you everything about our financial situation because I wanted to protect you from worry, but also because I wanted our daughter to love us for who we are, not what we have. Over the years, I invested every penny we saved. We don't just have the beach house, my love. We own 6 other properties, including the 20-story apartment building where Angela and Edward live. We also have significant shares in 3 companies that have grown beyond anything I could have imagined. You are wealthy, Antonia. You always were rich in the things that matter, but now you are rich on paper too. I spread the documents across our bed with shaking hands. There were deeds to houses in prestigious neighborhoods I had never even visited. A downtown condominium worth more than our original house, a small but profitable motel on the coast, and most incredibly, the apartment building where my daughter lived. Robert had been the silent owner for over 10 years, managing everything through a company I had never heard of. According to the legal papers, I was now the sole owner of that company and everything it controlled. The bank statements showed accounts I never knew existed, with numbers that seemed impossible. Robert had driven a city bus for 40 years, living modestly and never once mentioning that he was also a brilliant investor who had quietly multiplied every dollar we saved. Every sacrifice we had made, every overtime shift he had worked, every penny we had scraped, together had been carefully invested and reinvested until we had accumulated a fortune that would have been unimaginable to the young couple who had struggled to buy their first house. In his letter, Robert explained that he had kept our wealth secret intentionally. I know our daughter, Antonia. If Angela knew we had money, her attitude toward us would change. She would start seeing us as sources of funding rather than people to love. I want her to value us for who we are, not what we can give her. I want her love to be genuine, not purchased. The irony was breathtaking. Angela had abandoned me thinking I was a poor widow with nothing to offer, when in reality I controlled more wealth than she could possibly imagine. She had sold my properties to fund her European adventure, not realizing that she was stealing from a millionaire who could have given her everything she wanted and more. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through every room of the house, touching furniture Angela had always criticized as outdated, looking at family photos she had dismissed as old-fashioned, remembering conversations where she had rolled her eyes at my simple lifestyle. I stared for a long time at a photo of Angela at age 5, sitting on Robert's lap and laughing with pure innocent joy. What had happened to that sweet child? When had she become so cold and calculating? The phone rang early the next morning. Angela again, and this time her voice had that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something or when she was trying to manipulate a situation to her advantage. Mom, how are you feeling? I wanted to let you know we've already transferred the money from the house and car sales. We deposited your share into your account. It's not much, but it should help you live for a few months while you find something smaller and more manageable. My share of my own belongings. How generous of her to give me 30% of the proceeds from selling my own property. I see, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. When do you leave for Europe? This afternoon. Our bags are packed and we're so excited. Edward has an incredible business opportunity over there. This could change our whole future, Mom. When we get back in 6 months, we'll help you find a nice little apartment. Something that fits your needs. Something that fits my needs. As if she had any idea what my needs actually were. As if she had bothered to ask or care about my preferences when she was busy stealing my life. Have a safe trip. Dear, I said. Oh, Mom, I knew you would understand. You've always been so reasonable, so easy to work with. We love you so much. After she hung up, I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and began to laugh. I laughed like I hadn't since Robert died, deep belly laughs that brought tears to my eyes. The situation was so absurd it was almost comedic. My daughter had robbed me blind, kicked me out of my own house, spoken to me with unbearable condescension, and done it all to fund a European vacation that would probably end in disaster. But what hurt most wasn't the money or even the betrayal. It was the casual cruelty with which she had discarded me. 45 years of unconditional love, of sacrifice, of being there for every milestone and crisis in her life, and she had erased me from her world with a 2-minute phone call. That was the wound that cut deepest. I checked my bank account online and confirmed that they had deposited what they considered my share. They had sold the beach house for far less than its actual value, probably because they needed cash quickly, and Robert's beloved truck had been practically given away. The total amount they had graciously allowed me to keep was insulting, but not because it was small. It was insulting because they thought they were being generous. From my living room window, I watched Angela and Edward load their expensive luggage into a taxi. They were laughing and kissing like teenagers embarking on an adventure. Completely oblivious to the woman watching from the window, they had never bothered to look toward. They drove away without a goodbye, without a backward glance, without the slightest acknowledgement that they were leaving behind a human being who had loved one of them since birth. When the taxi disappeared around the corner, I sat at my kitchen table with Robert's documents spread in front of me like a battle plan. I could call a lawyer immediately, reclaim my properties, and reverse everything they had done within a matter of days. But something told me there was a better way to handle this situation, a more educational approach that would teach Angela lessons she desperately needed to learn. I called Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who had handled Robert's final affairs. He had been kind and professional during the funeral arrangements and had told me to call if I ever needed legal assistance. Now, I definitely needed his help. Mrs. Brooks, it's good to hear from you. How have you been managing? Better than expected, Mr. Peterson. I need to see you urgently about some documents I found among Robert's papers. Documents I don't quite understand, of course. You can come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since Robert's death. I dreamed about him sitting in his favorite chair, reading the newspaper just like every morning for 45 years. When he looked up and saw me, he smiled and said, "It's about time, my love. It's about time you showed the world who you really are." I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since Robert's death, I had a clear mission. I was going to reclaim what was mine, but not in a way Angela expected. I was going to teach her the difference between being powerless and choosing to appear powerless. The next morning, I dressed with more care than I had in months. I put on the wine-colored dress Robert always said made me look elegant, fixed my hair properly, and applied makeup for the first time since the funeral. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw a woman I hadn't seen in a long time, someone strong, determined, and ready to take control of her own story. Mr. Peterson's office was in an elegant downtown building with marble floors and tall windows that let in streams of golden morning light. He greeted me warmly, but when I showed him Robert's documents, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine amazement. "Mrs. Brooks, this is extraordinary. Your husband was far more sophisticated in his investments than I realized. According to these documents, you are the owner of substantial real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and business interests worth several $1,000,000. I know. Mr. Peterson, I've reviewed everything carefully. What I need to know is what legal options I have regarding the fraudulent sale of my beach house." He studied the property documents and sale papers Angela had somehow obtained. "This sale is completely illegal. Your daughter had no authority to sell property that was solely in your name. We can reverse this transaction immediately and pursue legal action for fraud." "No," I said firmly. "I don't want to file charges against Angela. I want to handle this differently. I need you to quietly reverse the fraudulent sale and help me gain direct control of all my properties, especially the apartment building where my daughter lives. But I want everything done in complete secrecy." Mr. Peterson looked puzzled, but nodded professionally. "I understand. You're the client, and we'll handle this exactly as you wish. What's your ultimate goal here?" "My goal is to teach my daughter the value of the things she threw away, but she needs to learn those lessons the hard way. She needs to discover what it really means to be powerless before she can appreciate what it means to be protected and loved." Over the following weeks, I lived a strange double life. To the outside world, I was exactly what Angela had left behind, a poor widow struggling to survive on the charity of neighbors and the small amount of money my daughter had graciously allowed me to keep. I played this role perfectly, accepting sympathy from neighbors, shopping carefully for groceries, and maintaining the appearance of someone whose world had been reduced to survival basics. But secretly, I was orchestrating one of the most satisfying comebacks in history. Mr. Peterson worked efficiently and discreetly, unwinding Angela's fraudulent transactions and restoring legal control of my properties to my name. Every few days, he would call with updates on our progress, and each conversation brought me closer to the moment when Angela would discover that her poor, helpless mother was actually the most powerful person in her world. The neighbors were kind but pitying in their interactions with me. Aurora, my lifelong friend who lived next door, would stop by regularly with casseroles and gentle inquiries about my financial situation. "Antonia, dear, how are you managing? We all know Robert didn't leave much money, and with Angela gallivanting around Europe, you must be struggling. If she only knew, I thought every time." "I'm managing just fine, Aurora. Don't worry about me. But what will you do when that small amount of money runs out?" "Maybe you should consider selling this house and moving to a senior community where you'd have more support." "I'll be fine right here," I assured her, knowing that I own not only this house, but half the neighborhood. These conversations happened constantly. The butcher would slip me an extra piece of meat with a sympathetic smile. The pharmacist would offer discounts on my prescriptions. The lady at the corner store would pat my hand gently when I paid for groceries. Everyone in the neighborhood had adopted me as their charity case, and I played the role beautifully while knowing that I could buy and sell most of their businesses without making a significant dent in my fortune. 3 weeks after Angela left, Mr. Peterson called with the first piece of truly satisfying news. "Mrs. Brooks, I have good news. We've successfully reversed the sale of your beach house." The buyers were cooperative when we explained the situation, and they received a full refund. "The house is legally yours again." "Excellent." "And the apartment building?" "That's more complex because you've technically always been the owner through the company Robert established. We need to make some administrative changes to give you direct operational control. I estimate another 2 weeks for that process." "Perfect. Keep me informed of every development." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen with my morning coffee, thinking about Angela somewhere in Europe, probably spending my money on expensive dinners and luxury hotels, completely oblivious to the fact that her financial foundation was crumbling beneath her feet. I decided to visit the beach house that afternoon. I took the bus along the coastal route that Robert and I had traveled hundreds of times over the years, past familiar landmarks and through neighborhoods where we had built a lifetime of shared memories. The house looked exactly as I remembered, small but charming, with window boxes full of flowers and a porch that faced the ocean. I sat on the curb across the street for over an hour, remembering lazy summer afternoons when Angela was young and still loved spending time with her parents. I could almost see Robert on the porch with his morning newspaper, hear Angela's laughter as she ran along the beach with her friends, smell the barbecue smoke from our family cookouts. All those precious memories that Angela had been willing to sell for quick cash. An elderly man emerged from the house and noticed me sitting there. He walked over with curiosity and concern. "Are you all right, ma'am? You've been sitting there for quite a while." "I'm fine, thank you." "Just remembering. Are you familiar with the previous owners?" "We had to give the house back because it turned out the sale wasn't legal." "Strange situation, really? What happened?" "Well, we thought we were buying from the family, but it turns out the daughter had no right to sell it. The real owner never knew about the sale." We felt terrible for everyone involved, especially the elderly lady who was apparently quite ill. "Quite ill?" "That's what we were told. The daughter said her mother was too sick to handle her own affairs and needed to sell quickly for medical expenses." We thought we were helping a family in crisis. I felt my stomach clench. Angela hadn't just stolen from me. She had invented a story about my health to justify her theft. She had used my supposed vulnerability as a selling point, making herself look like a caring daughter dealing with a tragic situation. "What a sad story," I managed to say, double quotes, yes. "It really was. We hope everything worked out for the family in the end." I left the beach house with a heavy heart, not because of the money or even the betrayal, but because of the ease with which Angela had lied about my condition. To potential buyers, I wasn't a real person with feelings and dignity. I was just a convenient fiction that made her theft more palatable. That evening, I called Mr. Peterson with a new request. I want to recover Robert's truck as well. Angela had no right to sell that either. "That will be more difficult, Mrs. Brooks. The truck was in your name, but your daughter apparently had a power of attorney that gave her the right to sell your personal property." "A power of attorney? When did I sign such a document?" "According to our records, it was signed about a month after your husband's death." "Don't you remember?" Then it all came flooding back. In the weeks following Robert's funeral, when I was barely functional with grief, Angela had brought me several documents to sign. She had explained them as routine paperwork related to settling Robert's estate and organizing his affairs. I had been so overwhelmed and trusting that I signed whatever she put in front of me without reading carefully. I remember now. She told me they were routine estate documents, This appears to be more than routine. This power of attorney gives her broad control over your financial decisions. We can challenge it on the grounds that you signed under false pretenses, but that will require legal action. Do it. I want everything back that she took from me. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my strange double life with increasing comfort. During the day, I was the poor widow everyone pitied. I would shop for bargains, accept charity from neighbors, and maintain the facade of someone barely getting by on limited resources. But in the afternoons, I became a businesswoman, studying financial documents, planning legal strategies, and learning things about investments and property management I had never needed to know before. I discovered that Robert had been far more brilliant than I had ever realized. Every investment he made had been carefully researched and strategically timed. The apartment building where Angela lived wasn't just valuable for rental income. It was located in a rapidly gentrifying area where property values were skyrocketing. I also learned that Edward, Angela's husband, had significant debts and had taken out loans using their apartment as collateral, never knowing that he didn't actually own the property he was using as security. When the banks discovered this discrepancy, Edward was going to face serious legal problems. Angela had no idea that her husband's financial troubles were about to destroy the life they had built together. Mr. Peterson called me on a Friday morning with significant news. "Mrs. Brooks, we've completed all the paperwork. You now have direct control of all your properties and investments. I was also able to recover your husband's truck." The buyer was surprisingly cooperative when I explained the situation and offered reasonable compensation for his inconvenience. "Excellent work. Now I need you to prepare a formal eviction notice for my daughter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Brooks, are you certain you want to take such a drastic step? She is your daughter. Mr. Peterson, she decided I was insignificant in her life. Now she's going to discover just how significant I really am in hers. Please prepare the notice to be delivered as soon as she returns from Europe. How do you know when she'll be back?" "I have a feeling it's going to be very soon." I was right. That same afternoon, Aurora came hurrying over with fresh neighborhood gossip. "Antonia, did you know that Edward is in serious trouble with the bank? My brother-in-law who works there says they're investigating loans he took out using the apartment as collateral. But the apartment isn't actually his, really? How is that possible?" "Nobody knows, but apparently Angela doesn't know anything about it either. The word is that she's going to have to come back from Europe immediately to deal with this mess. That sounds very complicated. It gets worse. People are saying Edward lied to her about the business opportunity in Europe. There never was any business. He just wanted to escape his debts here, and now everything is falling apart. Perfect." Everything was unfolding exactly as I had hoped. Angela had trusted Edward completely, had sacrificed her relationship with me for his sake, and now she was about to discover that he was not the man she thought he was. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, looking up at the stars and thinking about Robert. He used to say that the stars were the souls of people who had lived full lives, watching over their families from the sky. If that was true, then he was up there right now, watching his plan unfold with perfect precision. "Thank you, my love," I whispered to the night sky. "Thank you for taking care of both of us, even after death." The next day, Mr. Peterson called early in the morning, double quotes, "Mrs. Brooks, your daughter just arrived at the airport." "She's alone? Alone? What happened to Edward?" According to my sources, he stayed in Europe. There are rumors that they had a serious falling out, possibly over the discovery that his business opportunity never existed. "I see. Please proceed with delivering the eviction notice. She should receive it today. It will be done. She has 30 days to vacate the premises according to legal requirements." I hung up the phone and felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. After weeks of careful planning, the moment had finally arrived when Angela would begin to understand the consequences of her choices. She was about to discover that the poor, powerless mother she had abandoned was actually the one person who held her entire future in her hands. Angela arrived at her apartment building on Tuesday night. Aurora, who seemed to have a network of informants throughout the neighborhood, came to tell me the next morning, "Antonia, your daughter came back last night and she looked terrible. Pale, thin, with dark circles under her eyes like she'd been crying for days. She was all alone with just one small suitcase. Just one suitcase. Yes, and here's the strange part. When she tried to get into the building, she didn't have her keys. She had to ask the superintendent to let her in with the emergency copy. Edward had kept the keys, which meant he had made the decision not to return. Whatever had happened between them in Europe had been serious enough to end their marriage and leave Angela stranded in a foreign country with nothing but a single suitcase. Mr. Peterson called that afternoon with confirmation. The eviction notice was delivered an hour ago. The building superintendent confirmed that your daughter received it personally and that she appeared to be very distressed. How long did we give her to vacate? 30 days, as required by law. Mrs. Brooks, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this? Once she discovers you're behind the eviction, there will be no going back to your previous relationship. Mr. Peterson, she destroyed our previous relationship when she hung up on me after stealing everything I owned. Now she's going to learn that actions have consequences. That night, I lay awake imagining Angela's shock and confusion as she read the eviction notice. She would probably think it was a mistake or some kind of scam. When she called to verify its legitimacy, she would discover that everything was completely legal and that she had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Phone rang at 8 o'clock the next morning. Angela, and her voice sounded desperate in a way I had never heard before. "Mom, I need to talk to you urgently. Something terrible is happening. Good morning, dear. How was Europe? Did you and Edward have a wonderful time? Mom, I don't have time for pleasantries. I received an eviction notice yesterday from a company I've never heard of. It says I have to be out of my apartment in 30 days. This has to be a mistake. Do you know anything about a company called Robert Investments?" Robert had named the company after himself. How perfectly poetic. Robert Investments? No, I've never heard of them. Are you sure the notice is legitimate? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Mom, Edward left me in Europe. He ran off with another woman and took most of our money. I came back to find this eviction notice, and I don't know what to do. I don't have anywhere to go. There was the confirmation I had been waiting for. Edward had abandoned her exactly as I had predicted. Probably when their stolen money ran out, or when he realized the legal problems at home were more serious than he had anticipated. So sorry to hear that, sweetheart. Where are you now? I'm in the apartment, but apparently not for much longer. Mom, can I come see you? I need to talk to someone. I don't have anyone else. The irony was exquisite. After abandoning me when she thought I was useless to her, Angela was now turning to me as her only remaining option. The daughter who had discarded me like garbage was now begging for my help. Of course, dear. Come over whenever you're ready. I'll be there in an hour. After hanging up, I looked at myself in the mirror and prepared for the performance of my life. When Angela arrived, she needed to see exactly what she expected: a poor, vulnerable widow who had been abandoned by her own daughter. I put on my most conservative dress, arranged my hair simply, and practiced the expression of a worried but resigned mother. Angela arrived looking worse than Aurora had described. She had lost significant weight, had deep shadows under her eyes, and her expensive clothes looked wrinkled and neglected. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and she moved like someone who had been physically beaten. Mom, she said, stopping just inside the door as if she suddenly remembered how she had treated me. "Come in, sweetheart. Would you like some coffee?" We sat in the kitchen at the same table where I had first read Robert's documents months earlier. Angela looked small and lost in her chair, like a child who had wandered too far from home and couldn't find her way back. "Mom, I owe you an apology. I know I treated you terribly when I left. I said things I shouldn't have said, and I handled everything wrong. That's in the past. Angela, no, it's not in the past. I was cruel to you, and now I have no one. Edward left me for a 25-year-old hotel waitress in Paris. It turns out there was never any business opportunity in Europe. It was all a lie. He just wanted to escape his debts here and use the money from selling your house to fund his escape." "What debts?" "Apparently, he owed money everywhere. Banks, private lenders, credit card companies. He had been borrowing against the apartment we lived in, but now I find out the apartment was never really ours to begin with. How is that possible?" This was my moment to begin revealing the truth, but I had to do it carefully. I don't know, Mom. Property ownership is so complicated. The problem is that now the banks are coming after me for his debts. They say since we were married, I'm responsible for everything he owed. And now with this eviction notice, I don't even have a place to live. Angela began to cry, real tears of genuine desperation and fear. For a moment, my maternal instincts almost overwhelmed my carefully planned strategy. I wanted to hold her, comfort her, and tell her that everything would be fine. But then I remembered the coldness in her voice when she had called me from the doctor's office, the casual cruelty with which she had discarded 45 years of love and sacrifice. "Have you spoken to a lawyer about the eviction notice?" "I don't have money for a lawyer, Mom. We spent everything in Europe, and Edward took what little was left when he ran away with that girl. So what are your options now?" "I don't know. I was hoping maybe I could stay with you for a while, just until I can find a job and get back on my feet. I know I don't deserve your help after what I did, but I don't have anywhere else to turn." There it was. The question I had been waiting months to hear. After stealing my house, selling my possessions, and abandoning me when she thought I had nothing to offer, Angela was now asking me to rescue her from the consequences of her own choices. "Of course you can stay here, sweetheart. This will always be your home." Angela looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected forgiveness to come so easily. "Really, Mom? After everything that happened between us? You're my daughter, Angela. That will never change, no matter what mistakes were made." She stood up and hugged me then, a desperate embrace of someone drowning and clinging to the only solid thing within reach. I hugged her back, but not with the same unconditional love I had always shown her. This embrace was calculated, strategic, the first move in a much larger game. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll find work as soon as possible. I won't be a burden to you. Don't worry about that now. Just rest and recover, and then we'll figure out what your options are." Angela left that afternoon to collect her belongings from the apartment she would soon have to vacate. I remained in the kitchen, marveling at how perfectly everything had unfolded. She had returned to me exactly as I had planned, broken, desperate, completely without options, and most importantly, with no idea that I had orchestrated her downfall. But this was only the first phase of my plan. Having her move in with me would give me the perfect opportunity to continue her education. I was going to let her settle in and feel secure, let her believe she had found refuge in her childhood home. And then, when she least expected it, I was going to teach her the most important lesson of her life, the difference between being poor by circumstance and being poor by choice. That night, I called Mr. Peterson with my next set of instructions. "Mr. Peterson, I need you to investigate Edward's debts thoroughly. I want to know exactly what he owes to whom, And what legal options exist for separating those debts from my daughter's financial responsibility? That will require significant research, but it's certainly possible. Are you planning to help her with the debts? Eventually. But first, she needs to understand what it truly means to hit rock bottom. She needs to learn the value of everything she threw away before she can appreciate being saved. I understand. I'll begin the investigation immediately and keep everything confidential as usual. When I hung up, I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Robert had been saving for special occasions. It had been a long time since I'd had a truly special occasion worth celebrating. The game was finally beginning in earnest, and for the first time in months, I held all the winning cards. Angela moved back into her childhood bedroom the next day. She arrived with 2 small suitcases and a cardboard box containing what remained of her previous life. I watched her unpack in the same room where she had spent her teenage years, and I could see the humiliation in every movement. She had gone from living in a luxury apartment to seeking refuge in her childhood bedroom, like a failure who couldn't make it in the adult world. "Mom, I found this among Edward's things when I was packing," she said, holding up another manila envelope. "It has your name on it." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. It was another envelope from Robert, smaller than the first one, with newer-looking paper. My name? How strange. I wonder how Edward ended up with it. Maybe he found it among Dad's things after the funeral and forgot to give it to you. You know how disorganized he could be? I opened the envelope in front of Angela, maintaining my performance as a confused widow encountering a surprise from her late husband. Inside was a short note and a small brass key. "Antonia." The note read in Robert's careful handwriting. "If you are reading this after having opened the main envelope, it means our daughter is going through difficult times. This key opens safety deposit box 247 at the Central Bank downtown branch. There is something there that can help you help her, but use it wisely. Remember, the most valuable lessons are often the most painful ones. With eternal love, Robert." Angela read over my shoulder, her eyes widening with hope for the first time since she had returned. A safety deposit box? Dad had a safety deposit box and never told us? I had no idea. I lied smoothly. Your father kept many things private, apparently. Mom, we should go see what's in there. Maybe there's something valuable, something that could help us with our situation. The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking. Angela was grasping at any possibility of salvation, any chance to avoid facing the full consequences of her choices. I was going to let her cling to that hope a little longer before showing her the complete reality of her situation. "I suppose we could go tomorrow," I said after a calculated pause, "though I'm not sure what we might find." That night, Angela cooked dinner for both of us. Trying to be useful and earn her keep in what she believed was my financially strained household. The meal tasted like guilt and desperation, seasoned with her growing understanding of how completely she had destroyed her own life. As we ate, she told me more details about the collapse of her marriage and her European misadventure. Each story was worse than the last, revealing layers of deception and cruelty that painted Edward as an even more despicable person than I had imagined. Edward had been lying about everything for months. Mom, not just the business opportunity, but about our debts, our apartment, even our relationship. While I was selling their house and making myself believe we were building a future together, he was already planning to abandon me in Europe. How did you discover the truth? I found him in bed with that hotel waitress in our room. When I confronted him, he laughed and told me I had been incredibly naive. He said he had never loved me, that I was just an easy way to get access to money and documents for his schemes. And then he left you there? He took our remaining cash, our return tickets, and even my jewelry. He said I was welcome to try to make it on my own in Paris, but that he was done with me. I had to call the American embassy and borrow money from them just to get home. Each revelation made me feel a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because Edward had revealed his true nature exactly as I had predicted, and sorrow because my daughter had suffered genuine humiliation and abandonment. She was learning the hard way that her judgment of character had been catastrophically wrong. I'm so sorry you went through that, sweetheart. No one deserves to be treated so cruelly, but I did deserve it. Mom, I abandoned you for a man who turned out to be worthless. I sold your memories, your security, your future, all to chase a fantasy that never existed. I destroyed our relationship for nothing. For the first time since her return, I heard genuine remorse in her voice rather than just self-pity. Angela was beginning to understand that her suffering wasn't just bad luck or unfortunate circumstances. It was the direct result of choices she had made and values she had prioritized. The next morning, we took the bus to the downtown bank where Robert's safety deposit box waited. Angela was nervous and hopeful, treating this expedition like a potential salvation from her mounting problems. I maintained my role as a confused widow following her daughter's lead. While knowing exactly what we would find, the bank employee verified my identification and led us to the safety deposit boxes in the building's secure basement level. Box 247 was small but heavy, and when we opened it in the private viewing room, Angela gasped audibly. Inside were jewelry pieces I recognized as family heirlooms that had belonged to Robert's mother and grandmother, along with several expensive pieces Robert had apparently purchased over the years without telling me. There were emerald earrings, pearl necklaces, diamond bracelets, and an ornate gold watch that looked like it belonged in a museum. Also in the box was a detailed letter from Robert, explaining the origin and approximate value of each piece. According to his calculations, the jewelry collection was worth nearly $200,000. Mom, this is incredible, Angela breathed, lifting a string of pearls to catch the light. Dad saved a fortune for us. Do you think it's really worth that much? Look at the quality of these pieces. And this emerald necklace must be worth $50,000 alone. Mom, we could sell some of these and solve our immediate problems. There it was again. Even when presented with family treasures that represented decades of Robert's careful acquisition, Angela's first instinct was to think about converting them to cash to solve the problems Edward had created. Are you sure you want to sell your father's inheritance to pay Edward's debts? What choice do I have, Mom? If I don't pay something soon, the banks are going to come after everything we own. They could even put a lien on this house if they can prove I have any legal connection to the properties Edward used as collateral. How ironic. Angela was worried about losing a house that I actually owned, using money from jewelry that belonged to a fortune that could solve all her problems instantly. But she wasn't ready to learn that truth yet. First, she needed to fully experience the weight of her circumstances. We took the jewelry home, and Angela spent the rest of the day researching values and contacting potential buyers. It was painful to watch her reduce decades of family history to entries on a spreadsheet, but it was necessary for her education. I think I can get about 180,000 for most of the collection, she announced that evening, having spent hours on the phone with jewelry dealers and appraisers. It's less than Dad estimated, but it should be enough to pay off the most urgent debts. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? I don't see any alternative. If I don't pay something soon, we'll both be homeless. Over the following days, I watched Angela navigate the complex world of debt negotiation and creditor management. The woman who had once lived carelessly on what she thought was easy money was now scrutinizing every expense and researching every financial decision with desperate intensity. She had also started looking for employment, but her lack of recent work experience and the cloud of legal problems surrounding Edward's debts made her virtually unemployable in any decent position. The few opportunities she found were minimum wage jobs that would barely cover basic living expenses. "Mom, I went to 5 job interviews this week," she told me one evening, coming home with swollen feet and a tired expression. 3 of them ended as soon as I had to explain my legal situation. The other 2 offered part-time positions that pay so little I'd barely be able to contribute to household expenses. What kind of work were they offering? Cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves at a grocery store, answering phones at a call center. Jobs I never thought I'd be qualified for because they were beneath my education level. Now I'm discovering I'm not qualified for them because I don't have experience doing real work. The humility in her voice was something I had never heard before. Angela was finally understanding the difference between being educated and being employable, between having credentials and having skills that people were willing to pay for. Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson had been conducting his investigation into Edward's debts, and his findings were even worse than I had anticipated. "Mrs. Brooks, the situation is quite serious," he reported during one of our confidential phone conversations. "Edward owes approximately $250,000 to various creditors, and he used falsified documents with your daughter's forged signature to secure several of those loans. So Angela is legally responsible for debts she never knew existed." "Unfortunately, yes. Even though she was deceived, the law considers her responsible for debts incurred during the marriage, especially when her signature appears on the documents. Even if that signature was forged, what would it cost to fight these debts legally? At least $60,000 in legal fees with no guarantee of success. The most practical solution would be for her to declare bankruptcy, but that would destroy her credit for years and still might not eliminate all the obligations. And if someone were to pay the debts directly, that would be the cleanest solution. But few people have access to that kind of money. If only he knew that the few people included the woman he was speaking to, who could write a check for the full amount without making a significant impact on her net worth. Continue monitoring the situation. "Mr. Peterson, I may have some ideas about how to help my daughter, but the timing needs to be exactly right." As the weeks passed, I watched Angela struggle with decisions and realities she had never faced before. She eventually took a night job cleaning office buildings, work that left her exhausted and humbled, but also gave her the first sense of dignity she had experienced since returning from Europe. "It's hard work, Mom," she told me after her first week, "but there's something satisfying about earning money through my own effort rather than depending on other people's generosity." She had also begun volunteering at a women's shelter during her free time, helping other women who were dealing with situations similar to hers. Through this work, she was meeting people who had survived much worse circumstances and had rebuilt their lives through determination and mutual support. I met a woman today who left an abusive marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back. Angela told me one afternoon. She's been working 3 jobs for 2 years, saving every penny, and she just got approved for her own apartment. When she told me about signing the lease, she started crying with joy. I realized I've never felt that proud of accomplishing something entirely on my own. These conversations showed me that Angela was developing the perspective she had always lacked. She was learning to value things she had previously taken for granted: honest work, financial independence, genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual convenience. But she still didn't know the most important truth about her situation. One evening, while Angela was at her cleaning job, Aurora came over for our weekly tea and gossip session. "Antonia, I have to ask you something that's been bothering me for weeks." "What's on your mind?" "Your daughter's situation is very strange. She comes back from Europe completely broke, gets an eviction notice from a company no one has heard of, finds a box of valuable jewelry that appears just when she needs money most. And now she's working as a cleaning lady while living with her mother, who everyone thinks is barely surviving on Widow's benefits. Aurora had always been perceptive, and she was clearly putting pieces together that didn't quite fit the official story. Life takes unexpected turns. Aurora, yes, but these turns seem almost too convenient. It's as if someone is orchestrating events to teach Angela specific lessons. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe you're not as helpless as everyone believes, and maybe Angela's problems aren't as unsolvable as they appear. I looked at my old friend for a long moment, debating whether to trust her with the truth. Aurora had been my neighbor and confidant for 40 years, and if anyone deserved to understand what was really happening, it was her. Aurora, if I tell you something in complete confidence, can you promise never to repeat it to anyone? Of course, Robert left me much more than anyone knows. Much, much more. Aurora's eyes widened as I explained the real scope of Robert's investments and my current financial position. I told her about Angela's cruel phone call, my plan for silent revenge, and my strategy for teaching my daughter lessons she desperately needed to learn. Antonia, this is both brilliant and terrible. Terrible? Yes, because you've been watching your daughter struggle when you could solve all her problems with a single phone call. But brilliant because I understand why you're doing it. Do you think I'm being too cruel? No, I think you're being a real mother. Anyone can rescue their child from consequences. It takes true love to let them learn from their mistakes, even when it's painful to watch. But am I doing the right thing? Some nights, I lie awake wondering if I'm damaging our relationship permanently. Look at her now compared to when she first came back. She's learning to work, to value money she earns herself, to appreciate what she has instead of always wanting more. The Angela who sold your house would never have taken a cleaning job or volunteered at a women's shelter. Aurora was right. The transformation in Angela over these few months had been remarkable. She was developing character traits she had never possessed: humility, work ethic, genuine empathy for people in difficult circumstances. So you think I should continue with the plan? I think you should trust your instincts. You know Angela better than anyone, and you'll know when she's learned what she needs to learn. That night, when Angela came home from work, she found me reading in the living room and sat down beside me on the sofa. Mom, I want to tell you something. Today at work, Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the other cleaning ladies, asked me about my family. When I told her about you, about how you took me in when I had nowhere else to go, after I had treated you so badly, she said something that really struck me. What did she say? She said, Mia, you have something more valuable than money. You have a mother who loves you no matter what mistakes you make. Not everyone is that lucky, and she's right. Mom, I spent so many years taking your love for granted, thinking it was something I deserved rather than something I should treasure. You're my daughter, Angela. That will never change. I know, but I also know that I need to earn your respect, not just expect it. These past few months have taught me the difference between feeling entitled to someone's love and actually being worthy of it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. I was thinking about how much Angela had matured, how the selfish woman who had abandoned me was becoming someone capable of genuine gratitude and self-reflection. The next morning brought a phone call that would accelerate my timeline significantly. Mrs. Brooks. I have urgent news, Mr. Peterson said. The banks are preparing to file suit against your daughter for Edward's debts. If she doesn't make some kind of payment arrangement within the next 2 weeks, they're going to begin legal proceedings that could result in wage garnishment and asset seizure. Asset seizure? She doesn't have any assets. They don't know that. On paper, it appears she has access to valuable jewelry and potentially other family resources. They're prepared to be very aggressive in their collection efforts. It was time. Angela had learned the lessons she needed to learn about work, humility, and the value of genuine relationships. Now she needed to understand that she had never been truly alone. But the mother she had abandoned had been quietly protecting and preparing to save her all along. Mr. Peterson, I want you to prepare all the documentation necessary to resolve Angela's debt situation completely. I'm ready to reveal everything. Are you certain? Once you do this, there will be no going back to your previous strategy. I'm certain. My daughter has learned what she needed to learn. Now it's time for her to understand what real family love looks like. I arranged for Angela and me to meet with Mr. Peterson the following Friday, telling her only that I have found a lawyer who might be able to help with her legal problems. Mom, I can't afford legal fees right now. I'm barely managing to cover basic expenses, even with the job. Don't worry about the cost. Let's just hear what he has to say. We arrived at Mr. Peterson's office on a bright Friday morning. Angela had dressed in her best clothes, which now looked too large on her thinner frame. She was nervous, expecting another piece of bad news to add to her growing list of legal and financial problems. Mr. Peterson greeted us with his usual professional warmth, but I could see the anticipation in his eyes. He had been part of this strategy from the beginning, and he understood the significance of this moment. Miss Brooks, I've been reviewing your situation, and I have some remarkable news. We've discovered evidence that your husband Edward engaged in systematic fraud using forged documents with your signature. This means you are not legally responsible for the vast majority of his debts. Angela stared at the legal documents he placed in front of her, her expression shifting from confusion to amazement. I don't understand. How is this possible? Who paid for this investigation? I don't have money for this level of legal work. Mr. Peterson looked at me and I nodded. It was time. Angela, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have told you months ago. What do you mean, Mom? I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would fundamentally change our relationship forever. Your father left me far more than you knew. Far more than anyone knew. Mr. Peterson handed her a second folder containing the property deeds, investment portfolios, and bank statements that documented the true extent of my wealth. Angela read in stunned silence for several minutes, her face cycling through disbelief, comprehension, and finally, a dawning understanding of what had really been happening over the past few months. Mom, this says you own the apartment building where I was living. Yes, and multiple other properties. Investment accounts, business holdings worth millions of dollars. Yes, this means when I sold your beach house, it was fraud because you owned it. Outright. I already got it back. Angela closed the folders and looked directly into my eyes with an expression I had never seen before. Long have you known about all this? Since the day you called me from the doctor's office to tell me you had sold my house. You've known this entire time? When I came back from Europe begging for help, when I was crying every night about the debts, when I was working as a cleaning lady? Yes. Why, Mom? Why did you let me suffer when you could have solved everything instantly? This was the question I had been preparing to answer for months, because you needed to learn something you could never learn any other way. You needed to understand the value of the things you had thrown away so carelessly. Angela began to cry, but these weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of deep understanding and genuine shame. I abandoned you when you needed me most. Yes, you did. I treated you like you were worthless, like your feelings didn't matter. Yes, and you saved me anyway. Yes, but not in the way you expected. I didn't save you by giving you money so you could continue making the same mistakes. I saved you by letting you discover your own strength and resilience. Mr. Peterson discreetly interrupted. Miss Brooks, I should mention that your mother has already paid all the legal fees for your debt resolution, and the fraudulent sale of the beach house has been completely reversed. You are free of all legal problems. Angela wiped her tears and looked at me with a new kind of respect. The cleaning job I have now? You can quit if you want, I said, but I hope you don't. Why would you want me to keep working in a job like that? Because that job taught you something you never learned when life was easy. It taught you the dignity of honest work, the value of earning your own money, the importance of treating every dollar with respect. Angela was quiet for a long time, processing everything she had learned about her situation and about herself. Mom, even if you didn't have all this money, even if you were really the struggling widow I thought you were, I would have learned the same lessons. These months living with you, watching you handle difficulties with grace and strength, seeing how you never complained or blamed anyone for your circumstances, that taught me more about character than any amount of money could. What did you learn? I learned that there is nothing more valuable than having someone who loves you unconditionally. But I also learned that unconditional love doesn't mean freedom from consequences. Real love sometimes letting people face the results of their choices so they can grow from them. We left Mr. Peterson's office with a completely transformed relationship. We were no longer mother and daughter held together by blood and habit. We were two women who had consciously chosen each other after surviving the ultimate test of family bonds. Angela decided to keep her cleaning job for several more months, saying she needed to complete what she had started and prove to herself that she could succeed through her own efforts. She also continued volunteering at the women's shelter, eventually helping to expand their programs using some of my resources. I want to use what we have to help other women who are going through what I went through, she told me one evening as we planned the expansion of the shelter programs. I want them to know that making terrible mistakes doesn't mean their lives are over, that it's possible to rebuild and become stronger. 6 months later, Angela enrolled in a social work graduate program, paying for it with money she had saved from her job rather than asking me to cover the costs. She had developed an understanding of money that she had never possessed before. She knew the difference between earning and receiving, between having wealth and being worthy of wealth. Mom, I want you to know that our relationship now is better than it was before any of this happened. She told me one night as we sat on the porch Robert had built so many years ago. How so? Before I loved you because you were my mother and I thought I was supposed to. Now I love you because I genuinely respect who you are as a person. I choose to have you in my life not because we're related, but because you're the strongest, wisest, most generous person I know. And what about Edward? I got a letter from him last week. He's in prison in France and wants my forgiveness. I wrote back to tell him that I hope he learns from his mistakes like I learned from mine, but that part of my life is completely closed. That Angela, who married him, doesn't exist anymore. We never did publicly reveal the extent of my wealth to the neighborhood, though Aurora and a few other close friends eventually figured out that I was far from the poor widow everyone assumed me to be. Most people continued to see Angela's transformation as an inspiring story of resilience and personal growth, never knowing about the elaborate education I had orchestrated behind that. Scenes. Robert's beach house became a transitional shelter for women leaving abusive relationships, offering them a safe place to stay while rebuilding their lives. Angela managed the program through her graduate work, combining her personal experience with professional training to help other women navigate the challenges of starting over. Do you think Dad would approve of what we've done? Angela asked me one evening as we watched the sunset from the beach house porch. I think he would be proud of both of us, I replied. He always believed that the most important lessons are the ones we learn through experience rather than instruction. I just wish I hadn't needed to learn them at such a high cost to our relationship. The cost was necessary, Angela. If I had simply told you how much your behavior hurt me, you would have apologized and promised to do better. But you wouldn't have truly understood what you had lost until you experienced life without it. And now you understand that love isn't something you can take for granted. You understand that family relationships require respect, gratitude, and mutual care. You understand the difference between being entitled to something and being worthy of it. As I write this story, it has been over a year since Angela returned from Europe. She graduated from her social work program with honors and now runs the women's shelter program full-time. She lives in her own apartment, which she pays for with her salary, but she comes to have dinner with me 3 times a week and calls me every day. Our relationship is built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine appreciation that we never had before. Angela no longer takes my love for granted because she has experienced life without it. I no longer worry about being valued only for what I can provide because Angela has proven she loves me for who I am rather than what I have. The revenge I planned was the sweetest kind possible, not the revenge of cruelty or retaliation, but the revenge of transformation. Angela had to lose everything she thought was important before she could discover what actually mattered. She had to experience abandonment before she could appreciate loyalty. She had to work for minimum wage before she could understand the value of financial security, and I had to be strong enough to watch my daughter suffer when I had the power to end that suffering instantly. I had to trust that love sometimes looks like stepping back and allowing natural consequences to teach the lessons that words alone cannot convey. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover their own strength. Sometimes the deepest love requires the hardest choices. And sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing people to learn from the consequences of their own actions while you quietly prepare to help them rebuild when they're ready to truly appreciate what they have. My name is Antonia Brooks. I am 72 years old now, and I finally have the relationship with my daughter that I always wanted, one built on mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and the kind of love that has been tested by fire and proven unbreakable. Justice arrived not as punishment, but as education, not as revenge, but as redemption. And in the end, we both gained something far more valuable than money. We gained an authentic relationship that no future crisis could ever destroy. Robert had been right about everything. The most important lessons are indeed the most difficult ones, and the strongest love is the kind that helps people become their best selves, even when the process is painful for everyone involved. If you're listening to this story and wondering how it applies to your own life, remember this. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means allowing people to face consequences. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to rescue someone from the results of their own choices until they're ready to learn from them. True love doesn't enable self-destructive behavior. True love doesn't shield people from the natural results of their actions. True love gives people the space to grow, even when that growth requires temporary pain. Angela had to hit bottom before she could truly appreciate the height from which she had fallen. She had to experience powerlessness before she could understand the gift of being protected and loved. She had to learn to save herself before she could accept being saved by someone else, and I had to find that strength to appear weak while secretly orchestrating one of the most sophisticated lessons in personal responsibility ever devised. I had to trust that love would triumph over resentment, that growth would emerge from suffering, and that justice could be achieved through education rather than retaliation. In the end, we both learned that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought, sold, or stolen. They can only be earned through character, maintained through respect, and shared through genuine love. The story of my silent revenge became the story of our mutual redemption. And that, I believe, is exactly what Robert had hoped for when he left me those envelopes and trusted me to use them wisely. Some stories end with punishment. Some end with forgiveness. The best stories end with transformation. And this story, our story, is one of the best kind of all. The kind where everyone becomes a better person than they were when it began.